Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontifrac, in our house today. Um, I might just say a protege of a certain strategic friend of mine. Alex Brueckmann is in the house. Hi, Alex. Short bio, and then we're gonna get in some good questions about a fantastic book that you've written. I'm really keen to explore your mind as well. So, Alex, who is he? He's a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of The Strategy Legacy, which we're going to get into today, as well as Secrets of Next Level Entrepreneurs. He's the founder and president of Brueckmann Executive Consulting, based in, guess where? British Columbia, Vancouver. And he's impacted thousands of leaders around the world. His clients include high growth startups and Fortune 500 executive teams. Alex holds degrees and certifications in management, leadership, and voila, strategy from EBS University, INSEAD, and Harvard Business School. Alex, it's a treat to get you on the show. I've been dying to chat with you. This book, The Strategy Legacy, to me, is connecting so many dots. We're going to get right into it because one of the things that I want to share with you as my kind of mouse takes off on me is actually your work. And so the work that you have in the book, The Strategy Legacy, by the way, is this. You have this great model where you're suggesting that there are 9 elements of organizational identity. And the 9 elements are kind of in concentric circles for those not watching, but sort of in the middle or the first circle, you've got impact, mission, and principles. Then in that second one, you have goals, vision, strategy map. And in the third, it's management systems, capabilities, and targets. Now, I always love myself a good model, Alex. So take us through basically why you have this rooted as a centerpiece to the book. And then maybe just we'll do highlights. We'll start in the first concentric circle and we'll work our way to the outer rim. How's that?
Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much for inviting me to come on the show, Dan. The model is something that actually came about after probably more than 10 years of doing the work that I do. I never really had a model. It was just things that I talked about. And over the years, it starts to form into something that you first write down and it looks awful. And then you're like, nah, I'm not going to talk about that. And over time, it came back to me and it shaped, it morphed into this. And what it does is it combines the cultural, the leadership, and the strategic elements that basically all executive teams that I've ever worked with at some point had to tackle. And the reason why they are in concentric circles is that in the middle, you find what I call the foundational circle.
Mm-hmm.
Then around it, you find the strategic circle. And then around the strategic circle, you find the circle that holds that whole thing together, kind of a scaffolding that you build around your culture and your strategy. And that is the hard leadership work that you do to bring this stuff to life. That's why it's built that way.
So if we're going to start in the middle there, or the first, the foundation, I should say, sorry. So impact, mission, and principles. So take us through a bit about the thinking there. If that's core, if that's central, that's foundation. Why is that so important to strategy then, Alex?
Strategy at its core is, as Roger Martin would say, the choices that you make to win in your chosen marketplace. I often phrase it slightly differently because the word choices, I figured for some people it works better than for others. I often use the term priorities.
Yeah, it's all
So what are the handful of priorities that bring you to where you want the business to be? The problem is you cannot decide that unless you know who you are, what you stand for. So there has been talk about purpose for now more than 20 years to a very large degree in the corporate world. And the question when you talk about people in the corporate world, when you talk about purpose with them, they're like, yeah, we have that. It's a purpose. It's on the website, right? I'm like, interesting. So I started to dig a bit deeper. And that's the reason why you won't find the term purpose actually in the first version of that visual There wasn't the word impact, but the word purpose.
Ah.
And then at some point I realized, okay, if you do it properly, you define your purpose, which is your intent as an organization, what you wish to accomplish, what you wish to do beyond money. And your strategy becomes the vehicle to create tangible impact based on that purpose. So the problem is, unless you know what that tangible impact should look like beyond money, beyond transactional factors, it becomes really difficult to create strategy based on choices and priorities to actually get there. That's why impact is in this core circle, in this foundational circle. Strongly linked to that is your mission, which means, and I go a bit by the school of Patrick Lencioni here, that mission is literally just the description of what you do and for whom, without a lot of talk around it and fancy words and blah blah blah. Yeah. Really just down to the core. What is it that we do? What's the business definition, as Lencioni would call it? Mm-hmm. And that business definition is so key, because if you have a small business, that business definition is simple. It's easy to come by. If I asked, for example, my girlfriend what her business definition is, she had a clear answer around, well, I design clothing and produce clothing, something like that, mm-hmm. for children and women and no age. It's very simple, Yeah. But when you go ask that question to GE, it becomes really interesting what comes out of that question, because it's not that straightforward. But forcing yourself to make it straightforward also helps you understand, hey, wait a second. Let's not get distracted by those shiny objects left and right. Let's focus on what we really do. And that obviously looks very different for a large organization than it looks for smaller businesses. And when it comes to principles, we're really talking about values and the behaviors that come to life through these values. And this is often a very sticky topic, because, it's not about writing 5 fancy words on a flip chart or put them on nice posters and hang them in the hallways. That is really about defining what matters to you and why that is. So impact, mission, and principles together, they form a sort of non-negotiable core of who you are, of what defines you. That's why it sits at the center of those 9 elements of organizational identity.
So if we pick up on that, and we'll come back to the outer 2 circles in a second. So we just come back to sort of the book itself and your point about purpose. I actually wanted to dig into that, being a guy who wrote an entire book about it. You say that no one cares. Well, you kind of joke about no one cares about purpose. Yeah. And you have some really good comics and call outs in the book as well. And you suggest that the emphasis on the word why is actually wrong. And what you've done rather cleverly in the book is you've said, look, buzzword platitudes of why or purpose actually aren't doing anything. We should be doing something else. And you actually call it the why not. And I wanted to sort of delve into that in your opinions on the why of why not, as opposed to why and purpose and platitudes.
So the notion of why not actually comes from not asking yourself what would be the logic thing to do, but what would be the right thing to do, and why not do it. I give the example of Coca-Cola in the book. Mm-hmm. Where I talk about, if I were Coca-Cola, with the purchasing power that we have, with the financial means that we have, of course we are a Fortune 500 company. Of course we have quarterly reports. Of course we have shareholders. But you know what? Why just don't do the right thing? Would they just fire the entire executive team if they did that? Well, I doubt it. So if you ask yourself, why not do the right thing and make money at the same time? Why just, it's not about entirely changing the way you do business. It's not about becoming a not-for-profit organization. It's not the do good thing. It's the doing the right thing. And at the same time, making the money that you need to fulfill your obligations toward all different kinds of stakeholder groups. And when I talk about why not, it's really about daring to ask the question, why don't we use the power that we have not just to make more money, but actually to do something that is worth doing? In the sense of Coca-Cola, why don't we just help countries that don't have waste management systems? Why don't we educate them about waste management systems?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's our bottles that getting washed through the canals, into the rivers, into the sea. And that is something that I often challenge my clients with when I ask them, okay, this is nice. This is a nice why. This is good. This makes sense. Where is that thing that really lights you up? Where is that thing that is completely different, that you would not expect from that your stakeholders might not expect from you? And then the conversations have a different dynamic afterwards.
The book I'm referring to, mine, by the way, is called The Purpose Effect. I wrote it in 2014 and 15, but published it in 2016. The aforementioned Roger Martin actually helped me with that particular book. So 10 years on, tell me a bit about the irony that you're seeing with purpose. And it's obviously, in your case, the alignment with strategy. And we'll get to identity, by the way, but I want to focus on strategy first. So tell me a bit about what you think is the irony and where we are, if you will, 10 years after I wrote a book that said, look, at its core, an organization needs to stand for something. I believe as well that why is not enough. You've just done it really well by saying it in a way that, to me, why not actually makes sense to strategy. But I'm just curious your thoughts now. Again, I'm not asking you to go back in time 10 years. I'm just saying, well, why is there such irony in its relationship to strategy these days when it comes to purpose?
It's a really good question. I think for every organization, the answer might look a bit different. When I think about purpose, I think about what gives me as an organization, what legitimizes me in the sense of those around us, the community, the society. And when it comes to an organization that cannot answer that question, it's really not clear to me personally who you serve. Who are my constituents, if you want? And if you don't know that, it comes back to the question of mission, then you can't really answer what you do and for whom. And at the core, when you know what your purpose is, it's really about being able to answer the question, what am I uniquely positioned to solve? Which problem in the world am I uniquely positioned to solve as an organization? If I cannot answer that question, how am I supposed to produce products or create services that actually do that, solve a problem in the world? If I can't answer that question, I don't even know who my clients are. So, and as a strategy facilitator, it's really odd for some people that I talk so much about purpose and impact and these underlying foundational elements. But if you don't tackle them first, your strategy will inevitably just be about profit maximization, because that's the only thing that is left then. So, and if you think about the purpose of an organization as an institution in our world, in our society, if it's really just about profit maximization, I don't want to get up in the morning and do that. That's just not who we are as human beings. At least not most of us aren't. That's what I strongly believe.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. Okay, so let me let you off the hook on that one. Let's come back to the model and the 9 elements of organizational identity. Let's go to that second ring there. So tell us a bit more about the importance and maybe even just the definition of goals, vision, and strategy map there, Alex.
So the strategy map is just a visual to actually structure your thinking around what are my priorities, what are the choices. Mm-hmm. And it's a way that is pretty intuitive, I found. For many leaders that have never gone through a strategy process, a strategy map as such is a logic construct for them. So that's why I use it. You can use any other construct that you're familiar with, as long as it depicts your strategy in a visual way that works for you. So what it actually does is it takes your choices, your priorities, however you want to call them, and it helps you organize them in ways that you understand how your choices create value for different stakeholder groups, for example, And it also gives you hints on where you need to adjust your organization from a process perspective, from a structural perspective, for example. And what it does, it is that your strategy then, that's why vision and goals are in that same ring.
Mm-hmm.
What you do is you take that strategy, those choices, the priorities that you have to reach your vision. That's in the end what it is. It is the choices that you make to win in your chosen marketplace, and whatever winning means in your marketplace, that is described in your vision. So that, let's say, that future state of your business in 2, 3, 5 years down the road, whatever your time frame is. And goals, and that is something that I often find might be a bit confusing for people, because goals is such a normal term that you hear everywhere. When I use the term goals, I talk about the goals, the measurable goals that will come to life once you've executed on your priorities. So you make your strategy measurable. And we all know the term SMART goals. That's what this basically is. But it's one way to say it and another way to do it, and then really focus on those. Vision, where do I want to be in the future? Strategy, what are the choices to get there? Goals, how do I make it measurable? That's what sits in this strategic circle in the middle.
Feels like it's the muscle, almost like the engine that makes the entire thing work. Because then when you get to the sort of the outer rim or the ring there, where you have management systems, capabilities, and targets, that feels like a lot. Well, you're going to explain it, but that feels a lot like, okay, folks, now that we've got sort of our muscles and we can do maybe a lap around the track, we're going to try and do a mile or a kilometer or 10K or even, dare we say, an ultra marathon. That's what that felt like to me metaphorically. So tell us a bit about what that third ring actually means in Alex Brueckmann world.
That's actually 100% true, what you just said. This strategy piece, and that's also the reason why it sits in the middle. I figured that strategy is the only element in that framework of 9 elements that has that reaches into the foundational circle, and that also has reach beyond that. When we talk about management systems, we really talk about what do we need to change in our organization to make our strategy work. Management systems are systems that help you steer a business, but they are typically designed to maintain the status quo, to make an organization run stable. So if you change your strategy, it brings about a lot of transformation, a lot of change. If you don't adjust your management systems accordingly, it's typically what starts to stand in the way. Those are some of the barriers that you need to overcome. So adjust those systems to match what you want to achieve. Capabilities are your leadership capabilities to actually lead that change, but it also includes the subject matter expertise that you might not have today, that you need to grow within the organization to fulfill on the promise that you make with your strategy. And when we talk about targets, that's the breakdown of your strategic goals into individual targets. And that's not just the financial piece. That's also has a lot to do with the values and behavioral guidelines that you stand for. When you think about codes of conduct, for example, codes of conduct describe certain desired behaviors. If you don't translate values and principles as in general into individual behaviors, it might be very difficult for people to understand what that means in their role. Imagine a global organization. You have a certain set of principles, and they are the same for your sales team in Chile and for your corporate lawyer team in Japan. These terms will mean very different things to different people. So that's why you need to help them break them down into individually valid and valuable targets.
Love it. Okay, so we've got through all 9 elements of organizational identity. There's 3 more things I want to get to with you before we let you go. I want to come back to capabilities in a second. But what I do want to do first is I want to ask you what I found myself, first of all, Alex, smiling repeatedly as I'm reading the book. One of those smiles came from the fact that you call out the misattribution of Peter Drucker and the culture eats strategy for breakfast line, which he never said. And thank you for that, first of all. But what you're doing within that section of the book is you're aligning strategy or calling out the need to align strategy with organizational culture. And being a culture and leadership strategist, and you being a strategist on strategy, first of all, my hat tips off to you for that. Tell me and the listeners and viewers why not so much a culture strategy for breakfast, but you go on to write that you say, I don't agree that culture is a make or break factor of strategy, yet you're very clear that its alignment is critical. So tell me a bit about what you mean by the alignment necessity of culture and strategy.
Let me do that by telling you a little story about how I got to see how culture actually can break strategy if it's not
Okay.
addressed. When I was in my early days in my career, I was a strategy manager in a large international company. And we've had, after successfully rolling out an operational excellence program as part of the new strategy, we were focusing more on the sales part of things and to redefine how we would like to sell. And the sales leader of that organization kind of was our power sponsor, but that was just on paper. When we started to really get into the weeds, we quickly realized that we didn't have backing. And that led to the sentence that we've heard like everywhere we went. It was like, that goes against our culture. And I didn't understand that word. I just didn't understand what they meant with that.
Right.
Only years later, I realized that it was basically an excuse for implementing the changes that we asked them to implement. They said that they invented excuses that prevented them from doing things differently. And only years later, I then realized, wait a minute, culture eats strategy for breakfast in itself is nonsense, because a strategy defined and rolled out in a proper way takes culture into consideration. That's why those core cultural elements of values and behavioral guidelines sit at the core of my model. Your strategy is a means, it's a vehicle to focus and over-index on these elements. And if you do that as a leader, if you're not just focused on the bottom line, if meaning your profit, if as a leader you realize the importance of values and behaviors as a way to implement strategy the right way, thereby you create a culture, you create a performance culture that is not just about the result, but about the way you achieve those results. And in doing that, all the fluff that often comes around the topic of culture goes away. We're not talking about, free food for everyone. And we're not talking about after work drinks. And we're not talking about all these other elements that are certainly part of a culture, but they are an afterthought. They are not the core of culture. So creating a strategy, not only to build something to win in your marketplace, but doing it the right way. I call it people-centered performance culture. If you create something like that, it's not only about winning, it's about winning the right way.
I just couldn't agree more. There's so much HR people and culture fluff, as you've kind of alluded to, where and in the readings and writings and ways in which people are executing in these roles, with this line, culture eats strategy for breakfast, you can't have a hierarchy between culture and strategy. Culture is embedded in your strategy, and strategy has to be part of your culture. Like you can't separate the two and make one above the other or one below the other. It just, to me, is so nonsensical, and so many people have got this wrong. I was just tickled pink, Alex, to come across this piece in your book. Okay, I don't want to time out here. I also want to delve into the last two questions. One was, help me and the listeners understand your definition of the difference between strategy design and identity design. And then I'm going to pull up a graphic for those that can see that actually highlights the process that you use. But first, the definition, then we'll go into the sort of identity design process.
In that definition, how I call it, strategy is a part of identity. So you could run a strategy process theoretically on itself, but you can go slower and create more impact by using that strategy process to touch on all these other elements of organizational identity as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that process, you need to do that anyway. Otherwise, as we already talked about, your strategy will always fall short. It will be focused on profit. It will be focused on supposedly measurable things. And you might design a great strategy on paper to satisfy your board of directors. All these things are fine. But if you want to go really, really far, touch on these other elements. So create strategy as a core vehicle for your full set of 9 elements of organizational identity.
And this kind of identity design process that you've designed, should I say, actually hones in on, right? Sort of these key points and steps and things that you could be doing, right? Ultimately, as an organization, far better and differently than one's ever done before. So just take us maybe a high level view of what you mean by your identity design process.
So the process that is laid out in the book is the process that I've been going through with my customers over the past years. And it has been an evolving process. I didn't come up all like one morning, I dreamt about it and I wrote it down. That's just not how it works. So right now where it stands is a process that deliberately includes all these other elements of identity, not just the strategy piece. And when you actually try to make it happen, you can do this relatively simply and relatively easy in a relatively short time frame. A lot of strategy processes are highly complex. At least that's what the consultants tell you. And then they, millions of dollars that you spend on analyses that don't tell you anything. So at the core, an identity process, I shouldn't say they don't tell you anything. They don't tell you, the truth, but that's what we try to create. We try to create our truth in the future. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, that strategy, that design process or identity design process that you nicely put up here on the screen shows you 8 simple steps that you go through which you create those 9 elements, at least to a degree that you can operationalize them. So this is not a process that is about perfection. It's a process that helps you making progress, to learn as you go, and to implement as you go, and to have stages in that process where you stop, look, listen, and then adjust. So the worst strategies that I've seen are the ones that are supposedly the perfect strategies that never get implemented. And I'm not saying create a wishy-washy strategy and implement it with all you got. That's better than creating a perfect strategy and not doing anything at all. There still needs to be some 80-90% where you're like, this is good enough. We can do something with that. We can start to communicate that. We can start to bring more people on board, not just the ones who were involved in designing it.
Okay, last one, Alex, and I can't tell you how much fun I'm having with this and you today. The fact that you're the strategy guy and I'm the leadership guy led me to believe that perhaps it was our haircuts that puts us together to become a superhero power. We'll call ourselves Alex Pontifrac. We'll be combined together. No, the point being is that you sort of take a stab at killing off the term soft skills, and you highlight how inane it is. But then you point out the capabilities piece, which is obviously one of the 9 elements as well. So tell me a bit about why you have hatred like I do about soft skills, and what is it that capabilities means to you when we're talking about strategy, if not identity?
I think a lot of our listeners today are leaders. They are executives, and they came through the ranks based on a certain subject matter expertise that they acquired throughout their career. And I bet everyone who's listening right now had that moment in time when they realized, in the sense of Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. And it's just that moment, that aha moment, when you realize that those soft skills are actually the really hard ones to acquire, because you need to learn them at a point in your career where you thought you have mastered your craft. And then you realize that your craft is changing. The higher you climb in the ranks, the less it is about your subject matter expertise, but about how well you build relationships, how strongly you communicate strategy and culture, how you make decisions, how you help others thrive and succeed. And those skills are not something we learn in university. They aren't something that you just wake up with one day and you have them.
Mhm.
Like any other skill, you acquire them and you hone them over time. And this is a really, really hard thing to do. That's why I don't want to call them soft skills, because they are the really hard ones to acquire. And they are the ones that help you thrive and grow a career that is fulfilling. And it goes back to that concept of the legacy trident that I described at the beginning of the book, where it is not about you as a leader. It is about others. It's about those you lead, the culture you create, the business that you represent. And once you've mastered that craft of honing in on those soft skills, I think that's when you realize what you stand for as a leader. Your subject matter expertise will never define what you stand for as a leader, because the subject matter expertise is not what defines you and puts and like differentiates you from others. There are millions out there that know the same things, but it's like the strategy and the culture piece. It's not about what you know, it's about what you know and what you do with it. And there are these six strategically important leadership capabilities that I define in the book come into play.
Well, the book is The Strategy Legacy. You are Alex Brueckmann. This has been so much fun. Thank you for this and your time. Where can we find out more about you, Alex, and your books?
Thank you very much for having me. Easiest on LinkedIn and on my website. If you dare to write my name, go to brueckmann.ca. If you don't dare to write my name, go to alexthestrategist.com. That's way easier.
Yeah, Brueckmann and Pontifrac, not two of the easiest last names
Nope.
out there. When I get introduced at keynotes or what have you, and people say, "Hey, how do you enunciate your last name?" Typically, I just say Smith. Make it easier. So alexthestrategist.com sounds pretty good to me too. Alex, thanks again for your time and for this book, The Strategy Legacy. It's top shelf for me when it comes to strategy books, and that says a lot given I get to be mentored by a Roger Martin. So thank you again.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Dan.
Folks, that was another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Smith. And today in the house, Alex Brueckmann. Thank you again, all, and see you next time.